Vanessa Whitmore thought she was about to remove just another misplaced woman from the polished front lobby of Carter Royale Hotel, but she had no idea that within minutes, every ounce of her carefully built authority would begin to crack beneath the weight of a name she should have recognized. The Carter Royale stood in the center of downtown Boston like a monument to old money and flawless taste, its towering glass entrance reflecting the pale morning sun, its revolving doors swallowing men in tailored navy suits and women draped in designer coats. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. A pianist in the corner played soft jazz that floated through the air like expensive perfume. Everything about the place whispered exclusivity. Everything about it told the average person that this was not a building meant for ordinary lives. And then Emily Carter walked in. She wore a cream knit sweater slightly wrinkled from the 3-hour drive, dark jeans, flat brown shoes, and carried a modest overnight bag in one hand. Her chestnut hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, and there was nothing flashy about the thin gold wedding band resting on her finger. She looked tired, composed, and entirely out of place among the diamonds and polished leather surrounding her. A businessman near the entrance glanced at her, then quickly looked away. A woman in sunglasses paused mid-step and gave the bag in Emily's hand a dismissive once-over. Emily noticed the looks. She was used to them. She had spent enough years choosing simplicity over spectacle to know exactly what strangers saw when they looked at her. They saw someone forgettable, someone who did not belong. Behind the sweeping mahogany front desk stood Vanessa Whitmore, the hotel's front office manager, immaculate in a fitted charcoal blazer with a silk scarf tied sharply at her throat. Vanessa prided herself on maintaining Carter Royale's image with military precision. She could identify a billionaire investor, a celebrity athlete, or a socialite donor within 2 seconds of seeing them. And in her mind, the woman approaching her now fit none of those categories. Vanessa's smile appeared, but it was the kind reserved for inconveniences. Thin, professional. "Hello. Can I help you, ma'am?" she asked, already knowing this would not be the kind of guest she enjoyed assisting. Emily offered a polite smile and slid her ID across the counter. "Yes, I'm checking in. Reservation should be under Emily Carter." Vanessa took the license between manicured fingers and typed lazily into the system. Her eyes skimmed the screen once, then paused. The reservation popped up instantly. Carter Suite. Presidential level. 3 nights. Personalized executive amenities. Vanessa blinked. Then she looked up again at Emily's sweater, her scuffed shoes, the plain canvas overnight bag. Her brows tightened almost invisibly. This had to be some sort of mistake. "I'm sorry," Vanessa said, tapping 2 more keys she did not need to tap. "I'm not seeing an active reservation for this room category under your profile." Emily's expression stayed calm. "That's strange. My husband booked it personally this morning." Vanessa let out the faintest breath through her nose, almost a laugh. "Personally? Of course." "Well," she replied, voice cooling by several degrees. "The Carter Suite is one of our premium accommodations. It is generally reserved for long-standing executive clients and ownership affiliates." Emily nodded gently. "Yes, I'm aware." Vanessa folded her hands on the desk and leaned forward just enough to make the condescension unmistakable. "Are you sure you're at the right hotel?" The pianist continued playing. Suitcases rolled across marble. Somewhere behind Emily, a champagne glass clinked. But at that front desk, the temperature had shifted. Emily stared at Vanessa for one quiet second, and Vanessa mistook that silence for embarrassment. It was the first mistake she would soon regret. Emily did not flinch. She simply reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and checked the confirmation email one more time. Jonathan had forwarded it less than an hour earlier while boarding a conference call from New York. 3 nights. Carter Suite. Early arrival approved. She turned the screen toward Vanessa with the same quiet patience she might have used while showing directions to a stranger. "Here is the reservation number," she said softly. Vanessa barely glanced at it before pushing the phone back with one polished fingernail. "Anyone can create a screenshot, ma'am." The words landed with enough volume that the elderly couple waiting behind Emily shifted closer, suddenly interested. Emily lowered her phone slowly. There it was again, that subtle public edge, the tone designed not merely to deny service but to make denial visible. She felt heat rise into her cheeks, but she kept her shoulders level. "Would you mind checking again?" she asked. My husband handles all business bookings through corporate. Vanessa's smile thinned further at the mention of corporate. In her experience, people who actually belonged to executive circles never had to explain that they belonged. They arrived in black SUVs, wearing silk and confidence. They did not stand here in flat shoes with a canvas bag asking politely for reconsideration. Vanessa clicked through the reservation system with exaggerated slowness, then tilted her head as if delivering unfortunate news to a child. As I said, premium suites are attached to verified executive profiles. If there is a booking under that name, it would not be transferable without authorization from ownership. Emily blinked once. I am Emily Carter. Vanessa folded her hands. Yes, I heard your name. There was a tiny pause, and then she added, that does not automatically grant access to our highest tier accommodations. A faint chuckle came from somewhere near the concierge desk. Emily could feel eyes collecting around her now, not enough to create a scene, but enough to make her suddenly conscious of every crease in her sweater and every mile of dust still clinging to her shoes from the drive. She had attended charity dinners in rooms filled with senators and CEOs. She had stood beside Jonathan at international galas where cameras flashed all night. Yet somehow this quiet humiliation at a front desk felt more personal, more cutting, because it was built from something so small and so familiar. The assumption that simplicity meant insignificance. A young bellhop arranging luggage carts nearby looked over with visible discomfort. His name tag read Michael. He opened his mouth slightly, as if considering whether to say something, but Vanessa's sharp glance shut him down before a word escaped. Emily took a careful breath. Could you please call whoever approved the reservation? Vanessa leaned back. Ma'am, I am the front office manager. I am telling you there is an issue. Then, lowering her voice only enough to make the cruelty feel intimate, she added, this hotel caters to guests who expect a certain standard. We cannot simply hand over a presidential suite because someone walks in claiming a connection. The elderly woman behind Emily raised her eyebrows. A man seated in the lobby lounge looked up from his laptop. The pianist's melody continued, soft and elegant, almost mocking in its calmness. Emily stared at Vanessa, searching for some sign of misunderstanding, some hint that this was an unfortunate procedural error rather than a deliberate judgment. She found none. Vanessa had already decided what kind of woman stood before her, and facts were no longer welcome. Emily placed both hands lightly on the marble counter. Then perhaps, she said, each word measured, you should call the owner. Vanessa's lips curved into a smile that was no longer professional at all. It was amused, dangerous, and deeply certain of itself. Ownership, she repeated, glancing toward Derek Sloane's glass office at the far end of the lobby. That will not be necessary. It was the second mistake. Derek Sloane stepped out of his office with the brisk confidence of a man who disliked disturbances in expensive spaces. Tall, silver-haired, and wrapped in a navy suit that looked pressed within an inch of perfection, he carried the polished expression of someone who had spent 20 years learning how to make guests feel important while deciding in seconds which ones actually mattered. Vanessa turned toward him with visible relief. She had expected reinforcement, and Derek rarely disappointed his senior managers in public. Sir, Vanessa said, lowering her voice into professional concern, this woman is insisting she has access to the Carter suite, but there is no verifiable authorization. Derek's eyes moved to Emily, not to her face first, but to the overnight bag, the plain sweater, the unremarkable shoes. It was a scan so quick most people would have missed it, but Emily saw the conclusion settle behind his eyes before he even spoke. He had already placed her into a category. Good morning, Derek said, though there was no warmth in it. I am Derek Sloane, general manager. Is there some confusion I can help resolve? Emily handed him her driver's license and the reservation number written on her phone. I booked under Emily Carter. I was told my suite would be ready by 10. Derek accepted the phone, glanced at the screen, and then handed it back after less than 2 seconds. Ma'am, premium accommodations in this hotel are not assigned casually. There are security and financial protocols. The phrase financial protocols hung in the air with surgical precision. He did not directly accuse her of lying, but he did something almost worse. He suggested that believing her required naivety. Emily looked from Derek to Vanessa, suddenly aware that neither of them had made a genuine effort to solve anything. This was no longer about a missing reservation. This was about whether they believed someone who looked like her could possibly belong to someone named Carter. "I am not asking for a favor," Emily said, keeping her tone level. "I am asking you to verify the booking." Derek gave a tight smile, the kind executives use when they intend to end a conversation without appearing rude. "And I am asking you to understand that our ownership affiliates do not arrive without credentials, notice, or proper escort." Vanessa nodded faintly beside him, almost pleased by the sentence. Around them, the lobby had developed that peculiar hush found only in elegant places when people pretend not to watch while watching everything. A woman near the fireplace lowered her coffee cup. Two men waiting for a car service paused mid-conversation. Michael the bellhop stood frozen beside a brass luggage cart, his eyes darting nervously between Emily and management. Emily felt a wave of disbelief pass through her, not because she had never been underestimated before, but because the certainty in their faces was so complete. They truly thought they were protecting the dignity of the hotel from her presence. "Would it help," Emily asked quietly, "if I called my husband?" Vanessa let out a soft laugh she tried and failed to hide. Derek adjusted his cufflinks. "Ma'am, with respect, this is not a family motel off the interstate. This is Carter Royale. We cannot release executive suites because someone places a phone call." The words drew a few scattered smirks from the spectators now pretending to study artwork on the walls. Emily's fingers tightened around her phone. She looked at Derek for a long second, as if giving him one final chance to hear himself. He did not take it. Instead, he stepped slightly aside and made a small gesture toward the revolving doors. "Perhaps," he said, "you would be more comfortable at another property until this matter can be clarified." There it was, the polished version of being shown the exit. Emily swallowed the sting rising in her throat. She had driven 180 miles expecting a quiet check-in, a hot shower, and dinner with Jonathan after his board meeting. Instead, she was standing in a marble cathedral of wealth being gently escorted out of a hotel that legally belonged to her husband. She unlocked her phone. "All right," she said softly. "I will make the call." And for the first time since she entered the lobby, Vanessa smiled with open triumph. Emily pressed Jonathan's name and lifted the phone to her ear. Her hand was steady, but inside, humiliation sat like a stone in her chest. She hated this part. Not the waiting, not even the denial, but the fact that she now had to prove herself to people who had decided she was too ordinary to matter. Across the desk, Vanessa crossed her arms with the patient amusement of someone indulging a performance. Derek glanced discreetly toward the entrance, already ready to move on to guests he considered legitimate. Michael shifted his weight beside the luggage cart, his face pale with second-hand discomfort. The phone rang once, twice. Then Jonathan answered, his voice low and distracted by background conversation. "Hey, Emily, I am just stepping out of the boardroom. Did you get in all right?" Emily looked directly at Vanessa when she replied. "Not exactly. They will not give me the room." There was a pause on the other end. Not confusion. Silence. The kind of silence that appears when a man accustomed to control suddenly hears something impossible. "What do you mean they will not give you the room?" Jonathan asked, each word slower now. Emily kept her voice calm. "Front desk says there is no valid authorization. General manager agrees. Apparently, I do not meet the standard for the Carter suite." Vanessa's smile twitched. Derek's jaw tightened slightly at hearing himself summarized aloud, but neither of them yet sensed danger. To them, this was simply a stubborn guest exaggerating to save face. Jonathan inhaled once. Emily knew that breath. It was the same measured inhale he used before dismantling a bad investment deal or ending a disastrous executive presentation. "Stay where you are," he said. "Do not move." The line clicked dead. Emily lowered the phone. Vanessa lifted one eyebrow. "Will your husband be joining us?" she asked, with just enough sweetness to make the insult sting. Emily slid the phone back into her bag. "Yes." Derek checked his watch, clearly unimpressed. "Ma'am, if this is going to become a prolonged personal dispute, I must ask that you step aside from the desk so we may continue serving registered guests." Registered guests. The phrase landed like another careful slap. Emily stepped aside, not because he ordered her to, but because she suddenly no longer wished to stand close enough to smell Vanessa's expensive perfume. She moved toward one of the velvet lounge chairs near the center fountain, and set her overnight bag down beside her feet. The entire lobby pretended to resume normal life, but the pretending was thin now. Eyes lifted over newspapers. Reflections shifted in mirrored columns. A valet entering from outside slowed almost imperceptibly. People sensed unresolved tension the way animals sense weather. Vanessa leaned toward Derek and murmured something that made him exhale through his nose in restrained irritation. Michael gathered enough courage to approach Emily with a glass of water. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I am sorry about this." Emily looked up at the young bellhop and offered a faint smile. "Thank you." Vanessa's voice sliced across the marble before Michael could say another word. "Michael, luggage delivery to Suite 1219. Now." He froze, glanced apologetically at Emily, and hurried away. Vanessa watched him leave, satisfied that compassion had once again been placed in its proper subordinate position. 5 minutes passed, then 6. Derek had already begun speaking with another arriving guest, his polished smile fully restored, while Vanessa typed at her terminal as if Emily no longer existed. That was when a subtle change moved through the hotel entrance. It began not with sound, but with posture. The doorman straightened instantly. 2 concierges near the elevator snapped to attention. 1 valet nearly dropped a set of keys. Emily looked up. Across the lobby, the private executive elevator at the far wall had begun to descend. Vanessa did not notice at first. Derek did, and the color left his face before the doors even opened. The executive elevator doors parted with a soft metallic whisper, and Jonathan Carter stepped out flanked by 3 board members in dark tailored suits, their conversation dying the instant they saw the frozen tension spreading across the lobby. Jonathan moved with the controlled pace of a man who never needed to hurry because entire rooms adjusted themselves to his presence. At 44, he carried wealth the way some men carried rank, not loudly, not for display, but with an authority that made employees stand straighter and executives choose their words more carefully. His charcoal overcoat rested over one arm, his silver tie loosened slightly after hours of meetings, and his eyes, usually calm, locked immediately onto Emily seated beside her overnight bag like an unwelcome visitor in his own building. The room shifted. The pianist missed 2 notes. Derek Sloan dropped the welcoming smile he had been wearing for another guest and turned fully pale. Vanessa, still unaware of the scale of the avalanche approaching her, straightened her silk scarf and prepared her polished manager voice. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said, brightly, taking 1 step forward. Jonathan did not even look at her. He crossed the marble floor in a direct line to Emily. Each step echoed louder than it should have in the suddenly fragile silence. Emily stood. For the first time all morning, the humiliation in her chest loosened slightly. Jonathan stopped in front of her, his gaze moving from her face to the overnight bag still sitting untouched beside the chair. "How long have you been waiting?" he asked. "About 10 minutes, Emily answered softly. Jonathan nodded once, but his jaw flexed. He turned slowly. Only then did his eyes land on Derek and Vanessa. Neither of them seemed able to breathe normally. Derek took a cautious step forward. "Mr. Carter, I believe there has been some unfortunate misunderstanding." Jonathan lifted one hand, and Derek stopped speaking mid-sentence. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was worse. It was the gesture of a man too angry for unnecessary words. Vanessa's eyes flickered rapidly between Jonathan and Emily, confusion beginning to fracture her confidence. "Carter. Emily Carter. The reservation. Ownership affiliate." Her manicured fingers tightened around the desk edge. Jonathan looked at Emily again. "You checked in under your name?" Emily nodded. "I gave them my identification, the confirmation number, and asked 3 times for them to verify the suite." Jonathan's expression did not change, but something colder settled into the air around him. One of the board members behind him, an older woman named Linda Mercer, slowly removed her glasses as realization spread across her face. She had known Emily for years from foundation events. Seeing her treated like an intruder in the flagship property was almost surreal. Jonathan turned back to management. "So let me understand this correctly," he said, his voice low enough that everyone in the lobby leaned unconsciously closer to hear. "My wife arrived at a hotel operated by my company, with a valid reservation personally entered by my office this morning, and instead of being welcomed, she was questioned, dismissed, and asked to leave." Derek opened his mouth, closed it. Vanessa swallowed visibly. The businessman near the entrance lowered his newspaper. The elderly couple by the concierge desk stared openly now. Michael had returned with luggage from the upper floor and nearly stopped moving when he saw who stood in the center of the lobby. Jonathan took one more measured step toward the front desk. "Who?" he asked, each syllable clipped and devastatingly calm. "Made the decision that she did not belong here?" Derek looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at Derek. And in that tiny, panicked exchange, Jonathan received all the answer he needed. No one answered immediately, and that silence said more than any excuse Derek Sloan might have assembled. Jonathan Carter stood motionless, his eyes moving from Derek's stiff expression to Vanessa's visibly trembling hands, then back to Emily, who remained composed despite the flush of humiliation still lingering in her face. He had built billion-dollar properties in 7 major cities. He had negotiated with investors who could bankrupt competitors over lunch. But nothing sharpened his restraint like seeing quiet dignity mistreated in a place carrying his family name. Derek finally cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, the staff was acting in the best interest of guest verification and premium security standards." Jonathan turned his head slowly. "Premium security standards," he repeated, not as a question, but as if testing the emptiness of the phrase. Derek nodded too quickly. There was concern regarding identity confirmation. Jonathan looked toward Vanessa. "Did she provide identification?" Vanessa swallowed. "Yes, sir." "Did she provide the reservation number?" "Yes, sir." "Did either of you verify the executive office booking line?" Derek hesitated. That hesitation was fatal. Jonathan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. So this was not a verification issue. The marble lobby had become so quiet that even the soft fountain behind Emily sounded unnaturally loud. Guests no longer pretended not to watch. A woman near the fireplace had lowered her sunglasses completely. Michael stood frozen beside the luggage cart, his eyes wide. Linda Mercer, still behind Jonathan, folded her arms and watched with the hard gaze of someone witnessing a preventable corporate disgrace. Jonathan took another step toward the desk. This was a judgment call. Vanessa's lips parted. "Sir, I only meant to protect the image of the hotel." Jonathan's eyes landed on her fully for the first time, and Vanessa visibly shrank beneath the attention. "Protect the image," he said quietly. "By humiliating my wife in front of paying guests because she wore a sweater instead of diamonds?" Vanessa opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her confidence, so crisp 15 minutes earlier, had collapsed into scattered panic. Derek tried again, desperate to regain procedural footing. "Mr. Carter, if there was an error in tone, we can certainly apologize and accommodate Mrs. Carter immediately." Jonathan turned to him with a look so level it stopped the sentence cold. "An apology after public humiliation is not accommodation, Mr. Sloan. It is damage control." Derek lowered his eyes. Emily watched all of this in silence. She did not smile. She did not look vindicated. If anything, Jonathan's calm dismantling of the moment made her feel the mourning more sharply. Because now everyone saw what she had seen from the beginning. Not a misunderstanding, but a choice. Vanessa had chosen to measure worth by appearance. Derek had chosen to support that instinct because it aligned with his own assumptions. Jonathan exhaled and glanced around the lobby. "Do you know why Carter Royale was built?" he asked, not specifically to management, but to the room itself. No one answered. "My father started with one roadside inn in Vermont. One. He used to tell every employee the same thing. Marble can impress people for 5 minutes. Respect keeps them for life." His gaze returned to Vanessa. "Somewhere along the line, you confused luxury with superiority." Vanessa's eyes filled, but Jonathan remained unmoved. "And you," he said, turning to Derek, "confused management with permission to insult anyone who does not fit your private image of wealth." Derek's face tightened as if each word were being placed on him one by one. Jonathan then looked toward Michael. "You were the bellhop who brought my wife water?" Michael nearly startled. "Yes, sir." Jonathan nodded. "Once. Thank you for remembering she was a guest before anyone else did." Michael swallowed hard, stunned. Vanessa stared at the floor. Derek stared at nothing. And the room, which had once judged Emily Carter by a canvas bag and flat shoes, now stood inside the unbearable weight of its own miscalculation. Jonathan let the silence linger because silence, in moments like this, forced people to hear themselves more clearly than shouting ever could. Vanessa Whitmore stood behind the front desk with her spine rigid and her face drained of color. No longer the polished gatekeeper of luxury, but a woman realizing that every sentence she had delivered with confidence had become evidence against her. Derek Sloan adjusted his tie twice, a nervous habit he had never been able to hide under pressure, and looked as though he were calculating 10 different explanations while knowing none of them would survive the next 60 seconds. Emily remained near the velvet chair, one hand resting lightly on the handle of her overnight bag, watching the collapse with the same quiet expression she had worn all morning. Jonathan turned to Linda Mercer. Please contact Corporate Human Resources and have them place both managerial accounts under immediate review. Linda did not hesitate. Done. She stepped aside, already pulling out her phone. Vanessa inhaled sharply. Mr. Carter, please, I have worked here for 8 years. My record has been exceptional. Jonathan looked at her, not cruelly, but without softness. An exceptional record means very little if your instincts are fundamentally broken. Vanessa's lips trembled. I was trying to maintain standards. Jonathan shook his head once. No, you were trying to maintain appearances. Those are not the same thing. Derek stepped forward, sensing Vanessa sinking too fast, and perhaps hoping to save himself by sounding managerial. Sir, I take full responsibility for not de-escalating the situation appropriately. Jonathan gave him a thin glance. You do not take responsibility by narrating it after the damage is done, Mr. Sloan. You take responsibility by preventing it when the easier choice is to join the person with authority at the desk. Derek fell silent. The board members behind Jonathan exchanged grim looks. They all understood what this was now. Not merely an embarrassing front desk complaint, but a living demonstration of a cultural failure inside the flagship property. Jonathan slowly turned his attention toward the guests who had witnessed everything. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice calm enough to travel across the marble lobby without effort. I apologize that you had to see this. Carter Royale was built to represent service, not social ranking. Several guests nodded awkwardly. The elderly woman who had been waiting behind Emily murmured, "Good for him," under her breath. Michael still stood near the luggage cart, frozen between fear and awe. Jonathan beckoned him forward. What is your full name? Michael Reed, sir. How long have you worked here, Michael? 9 months, sir. Jonathan nodded. 9 months, and yet you understood basic hospitality faster than 2 senior managers. Michael blinked, speechless. Vanessa closed her eyes for a moment as if each comparison drove the humiliation deeper. Emily finally stepped closer, her voice soft. Jonathan. He looked at her immediately, and something in his expression gentled. She did not want a spectacle to become cruelty. Jonathan understood that look. He always did. He exhaled and gave one short nod, then turned back to the desk. Mrs. Carter's suite will be prepared within 10 minutes, he said. Complimentary breakfast service, privacy protection, and a written incident report on my desk before noon. Yes, sir. 3 employees answered almost in unison. Vanessa made one last attempt, her voice cracking now. Sir, I truly did not know who she was. Jonathan's answer came without delay. That is precisely the problem. The words hung in the lobby like a final bell, because everyone understood what he meant. If Emily had walked in wearing a diamond necklace, carrying a designer bag, and stepping out of a limousine, Vanessa would have smiled, bowed, and called her ma'am every other sentence. Respect had been offered conditionally, rented out only to the visibly wealthy. Jonathan glanced at Emily's plain sweater, then at the glittering chandelier above them. If dignity depends on appearance, he said quietly, then this hotel is poorer than I thought. And once again, the room went completely silent. Within minutes, the machinery of luxury that had once seemed so untouchable began rearranging itself around Emily Carter with almost desperate precision. 2 guest relations associates appeared from nowhere carrying fresh key cards, bottled sparkling water, and a silver tray of pastries no one had offered her when she was simply the woman in the wrinkled sweater. Another employee hurried toward her overnight bag, as if touching it gently might somehow erase the insult attached to it. Emily watched the sudden choreography with a strange mix of exhaustion and sadness. Service was easy when fear entered the room. Respect had been harder. Jonathan placed a hand lightly at the small of her back, guiding her toward the private elevator, but before they reached it, Emily stopped. "One moment," she said quietly. Jonathan looked at her. She turned, not to Vanessa or Derek first, but to Michael Reed. The young bellhop straightened so abruptly he nearly stumbled over the brass cart behind him. "Thank you for bringing me water," Emily said. Michael blinked, clearly stunned that in the middle of this corporate collapse, she had remembered such a small act. "Yes, ma'am." "Of course, ma'am." Emily smiled faintly. Kindness is never a small act. Jonathan watched Michael's face redden with embarrassed gratitude, then glanced toward Linda Mercer. Linda understood instantly and made a note on her phone. Michael did not know it yet, but his name had just moved upward inside a company where people twice his rank had spent the morning moving downward. Vanessa, meanwhile, stood motionless behind the desk, eyes glossy, shoulders no longer squared. She looked like someone trying to stay upright inside a room that had quietly withdrawn all support. Derek had retreated into managerial stillness, saying nothing, perhaps because he finally understood that every additional sentence only made the record worse. Emily looked at them both. For a brief second, Vanessa seemed to expect some triumphant speech, some cutting line delivered by the woman she had dismissed. But Emily offered none. She simply asked, "Did either of you ever think to ask why someone dressed simply might still belong here?" Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no safe answer. Emily nodded once, almost to herself. "That was all I wanted to know." Jonathan's expression shifted, not with anger now, but with the colder efficiency of decision completed. He turned to the assembled staff gathering near the concierge station, many of them shaken, many of them visibly ashamed by association. "Listen carefully," he said. "Luxury is not the chandelier. It is not the marble. It is not the suite on the top floor. Luxury is the feeling a guest carries when they realize they are respected before they are evaluated." Several employees lowered their eyes. A concierge near the doorway actually nodded. Jonathan continued, "The moment any employee decides they can estimate human worth by clothing, accent, luggage, or hesitation, this hotel ceases to be premium and becomes merely expensive." The sentence moved through the lobby with the weight of policy and moral indictment at once. Even the guests were silent now, because everyone knew they had witnessed something larger than one woman being denied a room. They had witnessed the invisible hierarchy most public places pretend not to have. Jonathan finally looked to Linda. "Schedule mandatory retraining across all Carter properties. Guest dignity protocol. Effective immediately." "Yes," Linda replied. Emily exhaled slowly. The morning had taken far more out of her than she wanted to admit. Jonathan sensed it and softened his voice. "Let us get you upstairs." This time she nodded. As the private elevator doors opened, Emily stepped inside beside her husband. Just before the doors closed, she looked back one last time at the glittering lobby, at Vanessa's fallen face, at Derek's rigid silence, at Michael standing straighter than before, and at the guests who would likely tell this story for years. It struck her then how fragile false superiority really was. Sometimes all it took to crack an entire structure of arrogance was one quiet woman refusing to disappear. Upstairs, the Carter suite was exactly as extravagant as the lobby had promised. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor, fresh white roses on the dining table, a fireplace lined in imported stone, and enough polished silence to make the morning downstairs feel almost unreal. Yet Emily did not walk immediately to the window or admire the skyline. She set her overnight bag beside the sofa and stood still, staring at nothing for a moment as the delayed weight of humiliation finally settled where no one else could see it. Jonathan removed his coat and approached her carefully. "Emily." She let out a breath that trembled more than she intended. "I know it is ridiculous," she said softly. "I know this should not matter as much as it does." But standing there while they looked at me like I was trying to sneak into someone else's life, her voice faded. Jonathan reached for her hand. "It matters because they made you feel small in a place that should have offered welcome." Emily nodded. That was exactly it. Not anger. Not revenge. Smallness. The oldest social wound in the world. Jonathan lifted her hand and pressed it gently. "I am sorry." Emily gave a faint, tired smile. "You did not do it." Jonathan looked toward the windows, toward the city carrying his company name on glass towers and brochures and investor reports. And for the first time, that morning his composure gave way to something quieter. "I built systems," he said. "I reviewed revenue. occupancy, executive staffing, customer satisfaction numbers. I thought if the business was functioning, the values were functioning too. Emily turned toward him. Most people do. Jonathan shook his head. No, I should have looked deeper. Down in the lobby, reports would be written, calls would be made, corporate consequences would unfold in carefully documented language. Vanessa Whitmore's authority had already evaporated. Derek Sloan's immaculate management record now carried a permanent fracture. Michael Reed, the bellhop who offered one glass of water, would receive an unexpected promotion within the week. Policies would change. Training seminars would be scheduled. Memorandums about guest dignity would move through every Carter property in the country. But none of that was the true center of what happened that morning. The true center was much simpler. One woman had walked through revolving glass doors wearing nothing impressive, and an entire building had revealed what it believed about human worth. Emily moved toward the wide harbor window and looked down at the ant-sized figures crossing the street below. "Do you know what struck me the most?" she asked. Jonathan stepped beside her. "What?" Emily folded her arms lightly. "Not one person thought I might belong until they saw you." Jonathan said nothing because there was no defense against the truth in that sentence. She continued, her reflection pale against the glass. It was as if dignity had to be introduced by a man in a suit before anyone could recognize it standing there on its own. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. In boardrooms, he was a strategist. In business magazines, he was a visionary. But beside that window, hearing his wife reduce the entire event to one devastating observation, he felt only the uncomfortable clarity of a lesson purchased at too high a cost. He placed an arm gently around her shoulders. "Then we make sure they learn to recognize it sooner." Emily leaned into him, not because the morning had broken her, but because even the strongest quiet people grow tired of proving they deserve ordinary respect. Outside, sunlight spilled across the harbor in long